G'day to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I'm just over here at Northmead, close to home, and I'm going on a bush track walk. First time I'm down here, and I'm just returning from the North Rocks Dam. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this path, which will take me under the M2. I've never been on this walk before, so we'll see where it leads us. But I hope it'll be as picturesque as what the other side was, and we'll try and learn something new, or at least review a book summary and do a walk and talk. And the book that I'm going to go through today is entitled Socialism. Socialism by an author named Michael Newman. I don't often talk about politics because it's one of those topics which creates a lot of emotional sort of energy and usually ends up in a brawl with most people. But what we will do today is in the peace and quiet of this beautiful bushland, suburbia in Sydney, we'll go through and try and understand a little bit more about what this author, Michael Newman, has put together in terms of socialism, what it means, how it benefits, and what the weaknesses are. So, according to this author, he kicks off the book by making a statement that today's utopia often becomes tomorrow's reality. His words, not mine, but what he's basically saying is whatever we can create in our minds, or whatever we can see in our mind's view, we can potentially create. So he says that there's been a revival over the past decade or two of the term socialism, and in recent times a lot more people talk of socialism, and that the socialism that they talk about may be completely different to the socialism that our parents, grandparents and other generations may have been subject to. So it's a review of the concept, what it is, and from what the author's going to show us here is that socialism can be expressed in many different forms. So there's not one fit or one size fits all. So the first formal point to come out of this book is where the author talks about the phone was just ringing in. So socialism can look different in different forms, but all types share common characteristics. So there are different forms of socialism in the USSR, in Stalin's times. There's a different sort of socialism in Cuba. And there's also a different type of socialism that is expressed in countries like Sweden. So just breaking it down, Cuba is a single-party state, whereas Sweden is a parliamentary social democracy, and both are very, very different. Oh, how beautiful is it along here? Check this out. It's like I'm in up at the Colo River. Just so beautiful. Wow, how come I've been missing out on this for years? And so the common element amongst the different forms of socialism, according to the author, is that their goal is to create egalitarianism. That's the single common element, forming a society that changes and improves and is able to benefit by the balance of sharing the wealth and the commonwealth. So what these different forms of socialism have in common, according to the author, is that they all agree that inequities, social inequity, is caused by capitalism. So that's the common element, that's the common link that holds the 3 or 4 different forms of socialism together. They are all anti-elitist, and they assume that people are better at cooperating with each other rather than competing against each other. There's a nice little stairway here, don't know where it leads to, but I might follow it up later on to see where it takes us. So the common premise for socialists is that they believe that people are good at cooperating, collaborating with each other rather than competing with each other. So I guess over the past year, COVID-19 and this pandemic, I guess have shown the pluses and minuses. But in reality, when it's all said and done, the countries, the first world countries, the capitalist countries, are the ones who have probably dealt with COVID-19 better than many of the other countries. Even though there is a premise that in capitalist economies people work against each other, it's not necessarily true according to the examples and the experiences that we've enjoyed over the past 18 to 2 years. If it wasn't for capitalist big pharma to come up with the vaccines that we have, the first world countries, first world economies, the capitalist economies would have absolutely struggled. And I notice that in Russia, their vaccination rates are well down. So how well they cooperate with each other in times where they need to cooperate with each other is still open to debate, I guess, is one way of seeing it. The second formal point to come out of this book is that capitalism actually led the way to the beginning of socialism, and from there came 2 different schools of thought. During the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, there was a change in the way people worked and lived. People who were once rural, living in families and village communities where everybody knew each other and collaborated with each other and worked together for the commonwealth of the community, now lived or were invited or forced to live in crowded and poorly planned cities because they sprouted up really, really quickly. And there we have it. We've got the M2, so I'm going to be walking under the M2. So I've always wondered and marvelled at the bushland on my way into the city where I looked left and right on the M2. And now I'm going to experience the beautiful walk under the M2 and to be able to say that I've done it and to know what this bushland looks like. So getting back to the Industrial Revolution and the lessons that we're able to glean from those days, Marx and Engels banded them together And Karl Marx, was always talking and writing about class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And Marx's, central theme was that capitalists, business, made profit by exploiting the worker, exploiting labour, and there was always a constant struggle. M2 up there. So there's always a constant struggle between the workers and the owners of business. So let's keep on working. Let's keep on walking. It's amazing. I love it. So the big question that we need to ask ourselves and to keep on reminding ourselves and to try and solve, and the most difficult one of all to solve, is the big question of how to implement socialism in a way that benefits people and benefits society and brings the biggest, juiciest and best fruit. So in terms of models, the author here talks about social democrats, where capitalism is reformed in a way to help labour, to give them a little bit more than what they're used to getting. So it's basically a model of compromise where the capitalist or the business gives a little bit more to the worker. The other model that the author talks about is a revolution. And you've got some mugs who are leading the protests, who are revolutionaries, thinking that they can overthrow the government. A handful of, village idiots who do their illegal marches, thinking that they can bully society into accepting their foolish views. But a revolution is all about overthrowing the elites, and I guess it leads to communism. The third point that the author here makes is that socialism could also be a promise for a better future if people learn from the mistakes of the past. So obviously we've had examples over the years, over the generations, where communism has led to famine, it's led to a different form of oppression, and it's not perfect. But there are other examples, I guess, and they use Sweden as an example, where some good roads can be made, but it's a fine line between what capitalism is willing to give up and what the workers are willing to accept, and to find a balance that works for both. And it looks like Sweden is a good example of that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that because it works for Sweden, it's going to work for other countries. I do note that over the past decade or two, there's been a rise in socialism in Greece. And there are groups of people who are very anti-authority, anti-government, anti-business, anti-big pharma. They're your typical anti-vaxxers, and I guess every society, every community has their fair share of these sorts of groups. But sometimes people take it to the extreme. I do remember back in the 70s and 80s when Greece had a socialist government there, PASOK, that Greece had some good times, but in terms of service, in terms of public service, getting anything done was virtually impossible because people were there placed in their jobs based on who they knew rather than what they could do, and just fed off the state. And there was a bloated public service which caused enormous economic challenge for the country. And now we've gotten to the point where future generations will be paying for the consequences caused by the radical few who thought that they were entitled to highly paid jobs without doing anything to justify their salaries. Anyway, we'll continue on. What's another point here? So what the author here says is that over the past 30 years, there's also been a rise in neoliberalism, where there's been a push for deregulation and privatisation of public enterprises. To be honest with you, I'm a believer and I am a fan of open markets. I'm a believer in foreign direct investment. I'm a believer in privatisation and deregulation. And it's worked wonders. It's worked absolute wonders for Australia, given that Australia over the past 30 years has enjoyed tremendous economic growth, making us one of the best countries in the world. The people who first instituted these neoliberal policies were Thatcher and Reagan. They were great promoters of neoliberalism and the concept of a free market. And as we said, free markets are great, but you need government to be able to regulate them and to oversee them so that they don't become too abusive in their powers and in their expression. So this neoliberalism, so to speak, as the author says, has led to inequalities. So once again, neoliberalism isn't imperfect as well. So all economic models have their issues and their challenges. So in finishing up, the author here suggests that socialism needs to be democratic at all levels. Got another road up here. I don't know which road this is, but it's coming off the M2. I'll have a look and try and figure out where this road goes or where it leads. And I think the path that I'm on it keeps on going. I saw this little pipe going across the waterway with the spikes, and I thought that this was the end of where I'm walking. But there's a little crossover here where you can cross over the creek. Anyway, I'll go to the rocks here and I'll finish off this vlog. So at the end of the day, nothing's perfect, according to what the author is saying. But we also need to understand that certain economic models work better in different countries because of the different mindsets that the people have and what they're willing to do and what they're willing to give up in order to achieve a particular outcome. So it's all about achieving a balance, and who knows what that balance is. But at the moment, one thing for sure and for certain is that the world is very, very divided. You see the economic outcomes of elections, and you notice that there are divided views, there are divided opinions, and there is divided voting on who should run the country. And what we end up having is minorities, independents, who have the balance of power. Anyway, so I think I'll finish off there. So thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I look forward to coming to you again from a different location, from a different place with a different message, a message of empowerment, where we can walk and talk and share ideas. And the track keeps on going, so I'll keep on going, share ideas and see where it leads us and what we can gain from it. Anyway, take care everybody, wishing you all the best, and I look forward to chatting again. Bye for now. Cheers.